Hello, Not Manly here. Welcome back to episode 23 of Kerbal Space Program. Jedorf Kerman is accompanying Jebediah on this production run of our first single-stage-to-orbit craft for use from the surface of Eve. Jedorf is a representative of Thrimm Aerospace, and it was Mark Thrimm's SSTO videos that helped me get through this very important part of the Kerbal Space Program. This craft does a zoom climb almost straight up on those Beelzebub turbo ramjets until we get to about 8 kilometers up, and then we start leveling off and doing our speed run. What I found out though was that the wing parts used by explodium breathing engines were not correctly tuned for Thrimm Aerospace research. I didn't realize this, but when I went back to a previous video and I saw that arrow on the center of lift marker, I'm like, wait a minute, that's the stock center of lift marker. The Thrimm Aerospace center of lift marker is something quite different, it doesn't have that arrow there. So I did some research and I found out that I simply had to copy the stock wing properties from the original stock parts to these parts. And the end result you see later on in the demonstration video that was just done earlier. That was done using a slightly unsupported version of Thrimm Aerospace on Kerbal Space Program 1.4.3. Here we're still on KSP 1.3.1, using the still kind of hybrid stock aero, stock drag, Thrimm aero, Thrimm drag model. But we're still managing to close orbit. We have about a 1.3 ton cargo in that cargo bay. It consists of a very small probe with some very small wings, an atmospheric fluid spectrometer, and this craft with 2.8 kilometers per second is going to go to Duna. We're going to try to fulfill those atmospheric survey contracts that we just acquired. The one that Valentina's rather upset at, actually, because she would rather we be exploring Bin rather than Duna at this time. But our Duna transfer window was coming up pretty closely. Whoop, staging isn't quite working here, so let's get those antennas extended. There we go. Activate the engine by hand. There we go. Now we're ready to eject that craft to Duna when the transfer window comes up. In the meantime, we need to deorbit our space plane. And I'm still trying to figure out where and when to deorbit it, so I deorbit it directly above the Space Center, still setting a periapsis of about 35 kilometers. And we're doing a very gentle re-entry still, because we still have these Mark 1 or 1.25 meter fuel tanks here, and they are very, very heat sensitive. But we have done this re-entry before, we know how to do it, and Jebediah is in firm command of this craft, and Jedorf is certainly enjoying the ride here. Might not have enjoyed the takeoff a little earlier, but the ride back down, no problem. Look at that. You know, to accomplish the same thing back at Kerbin, this craft only had to be about 40 tons, and it could take up twice as much cargo. This shows you how much different things are here on Eve. With its 1.7 times gravity, its much thicker but lower ceiling atmosphere, and so on. But hey, we've seen this re-entry before. I found out that actually Ohio Bob's realistic atmospheres aren't as realistic as I expected. While a 55 kilometer ceiling is still a challenge because of the really high orbital speed at that altitude, turns out that Ohio Bob set the altitude as though gravity were only 1.2 times that of Kerbin, not 1.7. If it were set for 1.7 times, then the atmosphere ceiling would be much lower, all the way down to 35 kilometers, never mind 55. I found that quite fascinating. No fault to Ohio Bob, he's trying to keep things realistic, or somewhat at least consistent, between all the different worlds here, but I found that very, very surprising. There might be a future version of realistic atmospheres that actually changes Eve's composition. It would mean as much air as in the stock atmosphere, but it would still be a pretty low ceiling, about 65 kilometers, but the surface pressure would be almost double what it is right now. We'll have to see what happens there. I might just try that myself. In the meantime, here Jebediah is approaching the Kerbal Space Center. We are less than 100 kilometers out. We're actually 83 kilometers out, and we are going to do a very... Well, I thought we were going to do a pretty gentle descent, but it turns out we have a bit of a mountain to get around here, and we basically do a zoom dive. Fortunately, these Zephyrus turbofan engines have reverse thrust, so we're able to control this descent. We also have an interesting set of air brakes. You look at those opposing elevons. That's much like the Fat Star series that I have built back in the AEK series. I simply have opposing elevons to spread apart and add some drag, and in this really thick lower atmosphere they add a lot of drag and are very effective air brakes. We've got an airspeed of only 60 kilometers per second, and well, this thing is practically floating down like a feather. It might be 43 tons, but the air being so thick as it is, even with the higher gravity, it just falls down like a feather. And Jeb has got full command of this craft. He just has to pull up a little bit, deploy those drogue chutes, and bring this thing down to a gentle landing. Jedorf isn't so sure here, but Jeb, he's got no problem. He's taken this craft up. And there we go. Drogue chutes, and come on. And touchdown. Look at that. 35 meters per second. But I did go back and fix explodium breathing engines to try to address the aerodynamic model used by our wings here, and the end result you saw in the demonstration video here. This is a reimagining of that craft. It can take up to 2.5 tons worth of cargo to orbit, and the center of lift marker is actually fixed. Also, by fixing the Thrimm Aerospace wing model, we're able to reduce the mass of these wings at the expense of some structural integrity. But these Big Ox wings are pretty tough. I could reduce their mass to half of stock and they would still have excellent heat tolerance and excellent strength. Look at that. We're going to prepare a little tanker craft that we're going to send up to Gilly as soon as we can get our EVA transfer pipes. We've got the regular external fuel ducts, and the EVA transfer pipe is supposed to be under advanced fuel systems, but it was missing, so I had to go and edit that mod a little bit, and there we go. EVA resource transfer now available. Turns out there was something to do with case sensitivity of a directory or something. But once I got that sorted out, we could actually use these EVA transfer pipes. Now, we're not going to send an engineer on this trip, but we've already got an engineer out there. We've got Natulov Kerman, plus we've got an engineer stranded in orbit above Gilly. So engineers will be able to use this little tanker to refuel craft in orbit of Gilly. So we'll be able to save Valentina. Also be able to transfer fuel from the surface of Gilly, from the Gilly base, up to any craft waiting in orbit. Also with the fixed aerodynamic model, there we go. We are much, much more stable. Numbers are not quite green, but a little fat. There we go. And now the numbers are green across the board at Mach 0.5 at Eve sea level. And not too bad. Let's get some flaps going there. That's better. About 2.5 degrees angle of attack to maintain level flight. There we go. With the aerodynamic model fixed, we also have in KSP, or Kerbal Engineer for KSP 1.4.3, we have Delta V for the explodium breathing engines actually being fixed. Our main rocket stage only has about 3 kilometers per second, but when boosted with those Beelzebub turbofans, we get a thrust to weight of above 1, so we're able to kick this craft up into orbit, which you have seen in the demonstration video. So we're going to load up these wings. If you want to see this craft in action, go up to the demonstration video. You will like it. I also managed to take this craft just almost to orbit in the stock Eve atmosphere. I had a periapsis of 86 kilometers. Almost, but not quite. A little bit of modifying, I might be able to get this to orbit in the stock atmosphere. There we go. We'll send Jebediah up and we'll get that tanker up on its way. The tanker launch you have already seen. All we got to do now is eject that tanker and get it on its way out to Gilly. And there we go. This tanker should get there slightly, about the same time as Valentina and her tourists get out there. So we'll be able to refuel her craft and make sure that she and her tourists can get back home safe. Doing an inclination change here. Still have plenty of fuel, plenty of Delta V for this little craft. And there we go. a probe launched from our first production single-stage-to-orbit craft used from the surface of Eve. We'll see it in action in a future episode. Until then, I'm not Manly. Fly safe.